So this is not like Hot Fuzz at all.
It's kind of like Hot Fuzz.
You may need to explain that to me.
I mean, she's clearly Simon Pegg. You can tell from the hairstyle and like the outfits.
Are you saying that she's Simon Pegg in disguise?
Yes, you're gonna do a Mission Impossible reveal with a rubber face mask or something.
It's just Nicholas Angel.
Yeah,
It's a secret sequel.
Yeah, there you go. It works
all right.
For the greater good.
So, yeah, last night at Soho, which is the latest Edgar Wright movie. We both saw it a few weeks ago. Stuff happened between then. We're finally now getting a chance to talk about it. So, this is definitely the biggest departure from Edgar Wright's typical filmography.
Oeuvre.
What was that?
His oeuvre.
Is that what you call it?
Fancy about it. Yeah, it's Ouvre, I think.
Oeuvre. It's kind of fun to say.
Yes, yeah, it's
Oeuvre Chaka. Anyway,
it's very different.
Yeah.
Everything else, definitely not Baby Driver.
Yeah, no, Baby Driver still I feel like fairly within his wheelhouse in terms of like action comedy. Like it was more just an expansion of stuff he would do with like Hot Fuzz or At World's End.
Yeah, no,
definitely tailored more towards the soundtrack. This was like his first attempt into like psychological horror or thriller.
This was a really effective descent into madness.
Yeah. It is very interesting to kind of like see him kind of delve into this territory because Edgar Wright has always had a very unique lens and way of like directing and shooting. And to see that kind of applied to a horror lens is something I was very excited to see. And overall, I think it works more than it doesn't.
I think it's very effective.
Yeah.
Especially considering that it's attempting something that is kind of unique in its own way. It's not it's not what you would generally be thinking of when you're thinking of like a ghost story or even a psychological thriller. It's an interesting take on that. And it helps that it was co-written by a woman.
Okay, that's actually good to hear. Yeah,
and she she hasn't had a lot of like big work. She worked on 1917, but there is a lot of interesting stuff in here about like gender, essentially, like men and women and those dynamics, and just like it does some really interesting things with it that are complex, in like just complex enough, but definitely give it enough it gives it enough nuance to not just be a very simple like good bad kind of story.
No, there's definitely a lot of nuance to the topic. It definitely explores power dynamics within, of course, gender relations. It does play interesting with the kind of like new to the city kind of typical tropes.
Well, that's actually I remember afterwards feeling interesting parallels thematically speaking, not stylistically, but thematically speaking, with both the Neon Demon and Saint Maud.
Yeah, I think he mentioned this to me.
Yeah, and I remember being really struck by that comparison because it wasn't things that I expected to think about. But just the theme of a city just taking a young woman with her dreams and essentially just consuming her.
Yeah.
And that whole tragic concept, just the idea of the glamorization of big city culture and all that jazz. And having that be a really seductive thing that pulls people in and then just destroys their lives and uses them until there's nothing left of them. And then on top of that, just the idea of, just the shit that men do. And it's very pervasive throughout the movie. It's very much, the theme is in the forefront of the movie throughout. Like it is simultaneously really upfront with how horrible its male characters are.
Yeah.
While also showing how, like, the modern character, it really, like, Eloise, yeah. Eloise's whole experience throughout the movie is based around fear, like, constantly.
Yeah.
And just these small town ideals being shattered, all these ideas of what the big city is like being shattered, and just being bullied, even though she's just like a sweet, lonely girl who, like, doesn't really know how to fit in with these popular, stylish people and everything, which is kind of where the Saint Maud thing came in. Like, she really just wants to be good, but there's constant themes of isolation and everything, and how that's slowly driving her deeper into this little madness that she's experiencing. And then just the stuff going on in the past with God, it's been weeks.
Right.
Sorry,
Anya Taylor-Johnson.
Yeah, Sandy.
I'm sorry, Anya Taylor-Joy.
Anya Taylor-Joy. But yeah, the stuff going on in Sandy's world, and just how much more predatory it was back then.
Yeah.
And how, there's still that stuff going on.
I was going to say, like, well, the movie also makes it clear that predatory nature hasn't really changed all that much.
Yeah.
Like, right from the get-go, with the taxi driver, who I thought for sure was going to come back in some way. And just the way they kind of play that off. And I was like, that was very effective. And just immediately going from playing with the myth of big city life and how it's going to be wonderful and amazing. You're going to make it, and immediately hit it with creepy perv who may follow you home.
Like, and that's the thing. It's the kind of things that, and I'll admit I've been guilty of this in the past where, I would ask my little sister, like, why doesn't she just take an Uber somewhere?
Yeah.
And I didn't think about the fact that, that way strange men know where you live.
Yeah.
And that's not a safe feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, women will constantly be dropped off down the street from where they live instead of being, like, going straight to their houses. And things like that. It's the kind of small things that you don't really get an insight into when you're living in a position of privilege.
Oh,
and the fact that, considering Edgar Wright and his fan base, which, there's a decent, female portion of the fan base, but
it's mostly men.
A lot of guys, just a lot of his fan base are guys. So for him to use the fact that he knows that a lot of guys will come see his next movie,
to kind of use that as like, hey, here's something you should be aware of.
Yeah. And it kind of reminds me of what like you would hear out of conservative circles when Get Out first came out.
Yeah.
Where they were like, it's some people hated it because they're like, it makes racism seem scary. And it's like, it is
fucking scary.
But then there were people who actually, it clicked for them because it was the first time they were seeing it portrayed like that. And they're like, oh shit, is this like, and of course, when it gets to the more fantastical horror elements near the end, like the sci-fi stuff, like that's different. But
yeah, well, I mean, like when
throughout the movie, you have that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
But when throughout the movie, you have that general sense of unease. I feel like this movie does the same thing when it comes to, being a woman.
Yeah.
Or even a young girl in the city where you could be at the mercy of anybody.
Yeah. And I think the movie uses the POV character very effectively. And by the way, I love to see this actress get more work.
Oh yeah,
she's been having a great couple years. Yeah,
yeah.
Between like Jojo Rabbit, even old, I'll give her credit for. And now this movie.
Yeah, that wasn't her fault.
It wasn't her fault, but she was still like decent in it.
I still need to watch Leave No Trace.
I haven't seen that one. But either way, her career is on the upward trajectory. I'm glad to see it. But the way they use the POV shot and her performance, instilling kind of that increasing paranoia and just kind of dread going wherever she goes, basically. It's a very interesting transition and very interesting character arc for her that eventually accumulates in just a really bombastic climax.
Yeah. The way that it builds through the movie
Yeah.
is really, it gets really intense.
Yeah.
I did not expect that level of intensity. And honestly, I wish I hadn't seen the trailers so much, because there were moments in the movie that had basically been ruined by overexposure to the trailers,
Yeah.
lost their impact. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to return to the movie again in like a year or two when the general initial memories have faded and I can just enjoy it as a cohesive whole.
Yeah.
But the way that she investigates the mystery and how these apparitions
Mm-hmm.
start following her and haunting her in her waking life
Yeah.
is really disturbing.
Yeah.
And when you realize how it starts affecting her perception of reality,
Mm-hmm.
and how she eventually becomes, a danger to people around her.
Yeah.
Some people said that was a little over the top.
I don't know. I don't agree with that necessarily.
Yeah, I think that I think she did a good job at portraying, someone who is that inescapably terrified of something that she can't solve.
And I feel like it had some influence of Hitchcock in there too in some shots, which you can argue kind of plays to me as parts that seem maybe over the top.
Yeah.
But I think it all works to kind of create that atmosphere and create that fear and create that, paranoia, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it is a paranoid thriller. Absolutely.
And I think that all of that kind of plays together. The over the top just feels like it's a part of it because, yeah, like when you're constantly terrified that someone's going to come get you at any given moment.
Well, and then they show up around every corner.
Yeah, exactly. So like that over the top reaction or the over the top sensations kind of contribute to that. Like it all makes sense in the context of the film.
Yeah, I feel like we're already pushing it, but I want to get into actual spoiler territory so that we can discuss it a bit more.
Yeah, let's do it.
But yeah, generally this is an excellent movie. Really does something unique and interesting. And I continue to be very interested in Edgar Wright's output.
Absolutely.
And, how he uses his voice. So yeah.
Spoilers for me out.
Spoiler time.
So first off, fuck Doctor Who.
Yeah, I mean, he played a very good villain here.
Yeah.
There's something interesting. Like, I've seen Peter Capaldi play a bad guy. I've seen David Tennant play a bad guy, and now Matt Smith play a bad guy. They're all excellent. They're just excellent in everything.
Yeah.
Like, they're so good. But yeah, the way that this movie, I had one big problem with the movie, and that was the twist.
Yeah, I kind of mixed feelings about it. Like I get what they're going with it.
Yeah, I understand having a red herring. It's one thing to have a red herring. It's another thing to show somebody something and show the audience something and absolutely basically saying that it's real and then just being like, haha, actually.
Be clear, what are you referring to exactly?
The fact that they had the scene where you see Sandy get murdered.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're like, actually, it was the other way around. And you're like, what?
Yeah, okay.
That literally goes against the entire structure that you've built so far. And I understand that on a certain level that there's a certain level of that kind of shit that I'm willing to let go of and give a pass. But I feel like this was just a really egregious example of it.
Maybe. I mean, I can also see it falling into the trope of like the unreliable narrator kind of thing.
Yeah.
So like I think it's what I was giving it a bit more of a pass, but I do agree that it was a little jarring.
Well, but it wasn't the fact that she was an unreliable narrator. It's the fact that she saw a vision, right? She was seeing essentially like memories of these murders. Like, was the explanation that she was seeing what the men were wishing had happened, or like what's the deal?
I mean, that's more up to interpretation. It's all told through her perspective, so maybe it's gonna be more metaphorical. She died that night, kind of a thing. Um, and she became Karen, the downstairs landlord. I don't know. I'm a
Although
spitball.
I do like what it adds to the element of like when she takes the guy back to her room and then like
Okay.
is screaming and freaking out and he leaves
Yeah.
and she asks her if she's all right and then she says that guy comes back, I'm gonna kill him.
Yeah. It's like I
Like
don't think she's joking.
it's in a very different light once you realize what's gone down in that house.
I think my thing was more like, how does that room just not smell? Just awful.
Yeah, you know, bleach is a wonderful thing. Um,
I don't want to know why you know that.
it's a cleaning agent. I'm just assuming. I don't know.
How
I
many
don't do
bodies have your
investigations on the
floorboards?
best
Move
way to
on.
remove blood. I mean, really, if we're going to get into that, we're going to talk about things like club soda and baking soda. So, like, that's different. Um, but just the way that this works in relation to the gender construct, the fact that this is so clearly talking about the predatory nature of men
Yeah.
and the idea of kill your rapist,
Mm-hmm.
and then the idea of what that kind of pain and trauma can twist someone into.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about where it went with at the very end with her being like, I'm going to kill this young woman too. But I don't know, like the overall story of it. Like maybe there's a moment where she suddenly realized the monster she'd become. And at the same
Yeah.
time, at the very end, it also points out, those men deserved it. Like I know they did. But where does that leave the overall arc of the story? It feels weirdly ambiguous for what it's trying to do.
I was kind of wondering that myself because I was kind of like, okay, how's the fact that she's like she was still preyed on by men, but now the movie's framing it like, well, she's back, she killed him, obviously, but they still deserved it. Like it does kind of sit in the moral gray area where it's like it feels like the movie's supposed to have a cohesive answer to it and doesn't quite reach that.
Mm,
Um, so like I'm not quite sure how that plays into things in terms of the overall purpose of the film. I mean, you could make the argument that the idea is corrupt men twist like ambitious women into murderous monsters. Um, which yeah, that could be valid. I'm not sure if that's what they were going for, but that's like probably the most generous interpretation of it.
well, I don't know. The I find there's been an interesting arc in a lot of movies about the idea of making a killer somebody that's understandable, where you can understand how they became what they are and what their motivations are and what their pain and their trauma is, while not necessarily endorsing who they are or what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I feel like this movie, it it doesn't say that her killing her rapists was wrong,
Mm-hmm.
but it does say that it turned her into something unsalvageable.
Okay.
And like the monster she is now is a product of that. And that is it's a very tragic um it's a very tragic look at like trauma and everything. And at the same time, I think there's something deeper potentially going on in regards to um the fact that the fact that Eloise is literally being haunted and followed around and terrified at every turn by these dozens of ghosts of men who
Mm-hmm.
were essentially predators, and the fact that she doesn't know where they might show up at any moment. And if you take that into the context of somebody who has to keep living in the same area as their sexual assaulter
Mm-hmm.
or their sexual assailant, or somebody who has been traumatized in that way and is now looking over their shoulders at all times, or just even without having been a victim of something like that, still has that fear. Mm-hmm. And what it drives her to, like the kind of frenzy that it drives her to by the end of the movie, it doesn't necessarily have to be a distinct or explicit message, but I think that they very effectively utilized that concept, just the fear of men.
Yeah. I think where that messaging get a little tricky. I'm not saying it's bad. It just means a little tricky. It's like mostly when the ghosts start to say like, "Hey, free us. We're trapped here," that kind of thing. I think that does frame them a bit more as victims in that particular moment. As like trapped spirits that are still being tormented by this murderous woman, which is maybe kind of tricky. And I'm curious to your perspective on it because I don't really know how to feel about it. Like I don't know, it just kind of it frames them in a slightly more sympathetic light, which I don't know what that says the overall message in terms of how to feel about these predatory men.
Wait, frames who in a more sympathetic light?
Well, like in the climax of the movie, when she realizes that the men she's been seeing are like are her victims, the people she's killed.
That
and
feel like Sandy's killed.
Yes.
But Eloise realizes.
Yes, when Eloise realizes that ghosts have been following her around are the men that Sandy has killed. When the house is burning down.
Yeah, she realized that before.
True, but then it kind of makes it more explicit. Like the ghosts are asking her to free them and kill her and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It feels like in that moment, like I said, it does feel like it's framing them as like victims that are trapped in that particular moment.
No, absolutely. And that's the weird thing there. That's the, they're ghosts. They're suffering. They're trapped. And the question is, where do your sympathies to them go?
Yeah.
Are your sympathies with the woman that killed all of them? Are your sympathies with these men that were murdered? And it very explicitly says, when Sandy says, those men deserve to die, and she says, and Eloise responds, "I know they did."
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I forgot about that line.
It's a very tricky thing, I think, because just by showing that they're suffering, and essentially the reason that they're grabbing at her and harassing her is because they want to be set free. They want their sense of revenge. It doesn't mean that Eloise believes that they deserve their revenge. It doesn't mean that the movie is endorsing the fact that they deserve their revenge. It just means that they want it, and that's why they've been coming after Eloise the way they have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you think it's less of an we just want to be free and live in peace, and so much we want revenge. Like, that's how it's framed.
Well, they want to be free, but the only way that a ghost can be free is by finishing its unfinished business, right? And for them, their unfinished business is killing their murderer.
Okay.
Getting justice in a way. I don't know. I think I have to watch it again before I really get a proper idea of how it's organizing its message. I feel like by the end, it had kind of spun itself up a little too much in its own cleverness and become a little more. It's not as clean cut of a message, but at the same time, I kind of appreciate movies that are not as clean cut and that have a little more complexity to how they present their message. So I need to rewatch it and kind of wrap my head back around it to really get an idea of what I feel about the message.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that it even has a message necessarily. That's the thing.
I don't know. I feel like it has a point to make.
I maybe in terms of like being your own person and all that, but that's really more of a character arc than anything. I think that really the point of this movie is kind of visibility into the female experience.
Maybe.
like what it's like to be a woman and like the kind of shit that happens to women and what they have to deal with. There's, there are people that found this movie quite cathartic because of the whole revenge aspect. I mean, and even what Sadie became.
Well, it's kind of like promising young women in women in that regard.
I still need to see that.
Movie.
I mean, it's on HBO now, I think.
If you want a movie that's going to knock you on your ass in terms of talking about women deal with. Woof.
Yeah. But yeah, so I don't know. I think that for taking a movie that's just entertaining and like Edgar Wright basically doing his Tarantino thing where he's like London in the 60s. Like I love it. The music, the sights, and like just basically just diving into that world as the setting for his movie because he really loves it.
Yeah.
So aesthetically speaking, very good. But also just the idea that women have always dealt with this, big cities have always consumed young women. Mm-hmm. And it could, I mean, when I was watching it, one of the things I thought was like, this could be about LA.
For sure.
Like very easily. This could be about LA or New York or Chicago. Like anybody who goes to a big city like that and has dreams centered around, an industry that is centered there, especially one that's focused on fame or glamour. It's seductive.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I just really appreciated this movie tackling those themes and making a horror movie out of it. It was kind of
absolutely. It is Edgar Wright stretching his wheelhouse in a really fascinating way. And I do think I need to see this again once it comes out, like on streaming. Just kind of getting that better idea of again, get a fuller picture of what he was going for. Mm-hmm. Like Edgar Wright movies are definitely films that are worth like rewatching just to catch all the stuff you missed because there's always stuff you missed.
Yeah.
So I look forward to doing that with this as well. And yeah, it's Edgar Wright's pushing himself. I appreciate that. I appreciate that in an artist and a filmmaker. Yeah. And it makes me very excited to see what he's going to do next because it's going to be different and it's going to be he's experimenting and I always appreciate that.
Yeah, especially from someone of his caliber of talent.
Absolutely, big time. All right, do you got anything else?
I mean, I'm pretty good. You asked that weirdly,
dude. I'm fucking tired. All right,
I know. Just the way you asked it, I was like, "You got anything else?" Like just. It was almost like weirdly confrontational. Like, are you done? Like,
you know what you need to do, Sadie.
What?
Anyway.
Okay.
Yeah. So, we're kind of taking a break for Thanksgiving. But after that, we're still got like Ghostbusters, which is all Ron, basically. The King Richard Will Smith movie we gotta watch. House of Gucci's out. So
shit.
How
does Ridley Scott have two movies coming out back to back? It's
I don't know, but apparently he's already pitching a fit about how Last Duel didn't do very well. So
it's COVID's still happening, and the trailer was garbage. And
no, he's blaming it on those damn millennials with their goddamn cell phones. His words.
Shut up, old man.
Yeah, pretty much.
I still love how Blade Runner is still romanticized the way that it is, and if you really look at it, it really is like a 13-year-old's idea of masculinity.
You're not wrong.
And he was that man as a grown man decades ago, and he really hasn't gotten that much better. So,
yeah. All right, I gotta get going. So we'll get to those movies later. By the way, the Sinestro video is up now. So far, it's been doing really well. So thank you everyone who's watching. Check that out. In the meantime, thank you guys so much for watching. See y'all later.